So recently, a friend of mine finally picked up Splatoon 3. While we wanted to play together, they didn't want to play with me on my main account, since, fun fact, I'm pretty high ranked. They didn't want my rank messing up the matchmaking and pitting us against top 500s, which is fair enough. So I did as any good friend would, and begrudgingly made an alt account. But there was still one more issue. They really don't like Turf War, and had played a bit of Splatoon 2 in the past, and so were able to skip right to playing ranked modes. I, however, on my newly made account, was forced to play Turf War until level 10, solo, because they didn't want to play Turf War with me. And this was quite the formative and quite the eye-opening experience, as it really highlighted to me why my friend really didn't want to play Turf War, and why Turf War is just such a bad mode overall. So going into solo Turf War, I did as any Turf War tryhard would do. I equipped Reflux and started painting my spawn. First thing that stood out to me while doing this was just how bored I was. Turf War as a mode is one that just does not promote that much interaction with the enemy team. When you first start a game of Turf War, the most important thing for your team to do is paint their spawn. The reason you want to do this at the start, because I know this has been a point of debate in the past, is something I'll get to later. But your spawn represents about a third to a quarter of the paintable ground on the map. And that's a lot. When games can be decided by a 10-point difference, making sure that you can bank the first 4 to 500 is, yeah, pretty important. If you can, you want to dedicate 1 or 2, usually 2 players on your team to just painting your spawn. But what that means is that for the 2 players on your team, the first minute of their game looks like this. Riveting gameplay, I know. And the thing is that when you paint your spawn, you want to paint it as perfectly as possible. This paint is about as free as it gets, so you want as much of it as you can get. And this made the climb even more boring for me, since I had to go back over the different spots my teammates had painted and fill in the blanks. No fault to my teammates, of course, they're not sweaty Turf War tryhards, it just means that I might go a whole minute and a half without ever interacting with an enemy player. One of Splatoon's biggest strengths is that its movement system and combat system is so fun and engaging. Splatoon 3's addition of squid rolls and surges only served to enhance this, but for the first minute and a half of Turf War, I got to experience none of that. In fact, the very idea of Turf War is one that de-emphasizes interaction with the enemy team. Painting the ground is an inherently risky act. Pointing your gun at anything other than a player leaves you open to a player pointing their gun at you. And so, to play the objective, you need to find parts of the map where the enemy isn't, or more often, kill the enemy, which I guess is player interaction, but Turf War is definitely the mode that emphasizes this the least. Eventually though, I did just give up on painting spawn and decided to rush mid for the rest of the game because that was just more entertaining. Now, throughout my climb, I made a point of using weapons that I wasn't all that good with. Things like Reflux and L3 to try and even the playing field a bit because, again, I'm a top 500 in beginner Turf War lobbies. Regardless, it's fair to say, some of our games were a bit one-sided. Especially the one where I played Rush by accident. Sorry. And this highlighted probably the worst feature of Turf War and why it is honestly the worst mode, the spawn camping issue. Okay, let's say you load into a Turf War game and the teams are a bit unbalanced, as they often are since this game's matchmaking is just something else. What happens? Well, the stronger team paints up mid, they grab the side of the map, and win fights as they go. And where do they go next? Your spawn. They push further and further into your spawn until they're literally killing your team as they spawn in. This isn't ideal, but is bound to happen from time to time. In modes like Splat Zones or Tower Control, it doesn't matter that much since it's pretty easy to knock out the objective and to move on. The game in these modes rarely lasts longer than 1.5 minutes. In Turf War though, you have to sit through the full 3 minutes. No matter how many times your team dies or how much of the map is painted, you have to sit through every second of it. And this can be really unfun. This is why every few Splatfests or so, a conversation arises within the community about how competitive players ruin Turf War by spawn camping everyone and ruining their fun. If you want to win a game of Turf War, spawn camping is unfortunately optimal. If you play a game of Turf War and you're against players who are leagues better than you, the only way this game can go is a spawn camp. What else can they do? They're not going to let you win, nor are they going to play worse just because they're against weaker players. But they can't finish the game early to reduce your suffering since Turf War doesn't allow for that. There is no antagonism here. The mode is bad and forces everyone to not have fun. During my climb, there were games where my team spent the first 2.5 minutes utterly decimating the entire enemy team, but still managed to lose, where despite being the clear winners for the first 2.5 minutes, we made one mistake in the last 30 seconds and lost everything. So let's talk about the final point, the 30-second rule. When comparing ranked modes to Turf War, Initially they can seem pretty similar. If we exclude the ability to knock out, the way the winner is decided is pretty much the same. In ranked modes, once the timer runs out, the team with the most points scored wins. In Turf War, when the timer runs out, the team with the most paint on the map wins. Of course, they're not the same, we know they're not the same, and the distinction lies in the scoring system. In a ranked mode like Clan Blitz, let's say, if you score 60 points, that's it. You have 60 points to your name. There is nothing the enemy team can do to reduce your points. The only way to change the point total is for you to score more points. That also means that progress that you make on the objective is permanent. If you start the game with a really strong push, that can last you until the end of the game. If you make a really good play that lets your team score 4 extra clams, those 12 points matter, no matter when in the game they happened, and could mean the difference between a win and a loss. In Turf War, however, there is no such thing as permanent progress. Any paint you put down can very easily be covered by the enemy team at any point in the game. The only paint that matters is the paint that's still there when the 3 minutes is over. In practice, what this means is that paint that you put down close to the end of the game is worth more than paint you put down at the start, since paint put down at the end is less likely to be covered by the enemy team. Ask any Western competitive player why they don't like to play Turf War, and they'll often say that it's because only the last 30 seconds matter, and this is what they're referring to. This is how I was losing these otherwise very dominant games. I would die in the last 30-ish seconds along with 1 or 2 of my teammates, and the enemy team would just have free reign to paint all over the map. All the progress we made in the first 2.5 minutes of the game just didn't matter, since we happened to make a mistake at the wrong point, and couldn't use our utter domination at the start of the game to bank points or force a knockout. This is also why the best time to paint your spawn is at the start of the game, by the way. Dedicating 2 people at the start of the game to paint your spawn in ranked modes is usually pretty bad, since you have less people to fight for mid at the start. But that doesn't matter in Turf War, since the first minute of the game is the least important, so you may as well spend it getting as many points in your spawn as you can, so you don't have to do it during the crucial last 30 seconds of the game. So, is Turf War beyond saving? Yes, thank you for watching, Pasta La Vista. Okay, so if somebody pointed a custom Elite to 4K scope to my head and told me that I had to save Turf War, then I'd aim to fix both the knockout issue and the issue of the last 30 seconds, as well as probably call the police. I'd probably ignore the spawn painting issue, since yeah, painting spawn is boring, but like it's far from the worst issue in the mode, and my own personal safety is important. So the first issue I want to try and fix is the issue of point impermanence. We need ways for players to be able to bank points, to make permanent progress towards victory. Splatoon 2 actually tried to solve this with a certain shifty station where they used domes to section off parts of the map at certain times of the game. I'm not a big fan of this, since straight up sectioning off parts of the map just serves to make Splatoon 3's hallways feel even more cramped. So instead, let's look at Tricolor and see what that does. So Tricolor has an objective in the middle of the map where if the attacking team gets a hold of it, it would just spawn a massive indestructible sprinkler to paint the map for you, which I like a lot more, and can also help us with the knockout issue, which we'll get to in a sec. So to fix this, I propose that we essentially just dot multiple ultra signals, mini signals, around the map. They can work like normal ultra signals where you have to hold them for a set amount of time, or they can be like mini splat zones where if you control it for a certain amount of time, it summons a permanent sprinkler for you and the zone slowly disappears, becoming normal paintable ground again. This means that if you win an early fight, you could snowball it into grabbing an early ultra signal or 2. We can then use this to solve the knockout issue, since if a team manages to control a certain amount of them, let's say 4 of them, then that team wins without needing to run down the clock. Those are my ideas, at least. If you have your own, well, the comment section exists. But with that, Pasta La Vista.